From translation, TLB, the Living Bible. This 94th day of the year. Today we are reading passages 1 Samuel 28 to 31. 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 1 to 25. David returned from his raids on the Philistines and said to Achish, "Let me go back to the town of Ziklag, for I must live there with my people." Achish said, "You are welcome here, David. As long as you stay with me." David replied, "I will be your servant as long as you wish." Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Meanwhile Saul had driven out the mediums and spiritists from the land. The Philistines assembled their armies and came to Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and camped on Mount Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was terrified, and he prayed to the Lord for help, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or prophets or Urim. Finally Saul said to his servants, "Find a woman who is a medium, so I can go and ask her what to do." His servants answered him, "There is a woman at Endor who is a medium." So Saul disguised himself, put on other clothes, and went with 2 of his men to visit her at night. He said to her, "Bring up for me the spirit of the dead prophet Samuel." The woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off all the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you trying to trap me to get me killed?" But Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for doing this." Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a spirit coming up from the ground." "What does he look like?" asked Saul. "An old man wearing a robe," she said. Saul knew it was Samuel, so he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Samuel asked. "I am in great trouble," Saul replied. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has left me and no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what I should do." Samuel said, "Why do you ask me, since the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will hand both Israel and you over to the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also hand the army of Israel over to the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, terrified by Samuel's words. He had no strength left, for he had eaten nothing all that day and night. When the woman saw how terrified he was, she said, "Your servant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you asked me to do. Now please listen to me. Let me give you some food so you can regain your strength for the journey." But he refused. "I will not eat," he said. So the woman took a calf she had prepared and cooked it, and she brought the food to Saul and his men, and they ate. Then they went away that night. The woman had a fat calf at her home. She quickly slaughtered it and took flour, kneaded it into bread without yeast, and baked it for Saul and his men. Then they ate and went away that night. 1 Samuel chapter 29, verses 1 to 11. The Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, and Israel camped by the spring in Jezreel. The Philistine rulers marched ahead of their units in groups of hundreds and thousands, and David and his men marched at the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines said, "What about these Hebrews?" Achish replied, "Is not David, this servant of mine, with me? I have found no fault in him, for he has been pleasing to me ever since I brought him over." But the Philistine commanders were angry with Achish and said, "Send this fellow back. He must not go down with us to battle, or in the battle he may turn against us and become our adversary with his master. Isn't this the David they sang about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. So Achish summoned David and said, "As surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright in my eyes, and it is good to have you with me in the army. I am pleased with you, and so are my commanders. Go and fight, for with my help you will defeat our enemies." "But what have I done?" asked David. "What have you found against me from the time I came to you until now? Why can't I go and fight the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish replied, "I know that you have been as pleasing in my eyes as an angel of God. But the Philistine commanders have said, 'He must not go up with us into the battle. Now get up early in the morning, along with your master's servants who have come with you, and as soon as it is light, go on your way.' So David and his men got up early in the morning to go back to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 to 31. David and his men arrived at Ziklag on the 3rd day. The Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken the women captive, including those who were in Ziklag. They killed none of them, but carried them off and went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's 2 wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him to death, for all the men were bitter in spirit over the loss of their sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. David said to Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought it to him. Then David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David and the 600 men with him came to the Besor valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and 400 of his men continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. They gave him bread to eat and water to drink. They gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. He ate and drank and then revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David asked him, "To whom do you belong?" "Where do you come from?" He said, "I am an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me because I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some belonging to Judah and some to Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" He answered, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." He led David down, and there were the Amalekites scattered over the countryside, eating and drinking and celebrating, because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, son or daughter, plunder or anything they had taken. David brought everything back. David took all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the animals in front of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder." David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him and who were left behind at the Besor valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he greeted them. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, "Because they did not go out with us, we will not share the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and leave." David replied, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and handed over to us the forces that attacked us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All will share alike." David made this a statute and ordinance for Israel from that day to this. When David arrived at Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." He sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth of the Negev, and Jattir, to those in Aroer, Siphmoth, Eshtemoa, to those in Rakel, the towns of the Jerahmeelites, and to those in the towns of the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Borash, and Asach, to those in Hebron, and to all the places where David and his men had roamed. 1 Samuel chapter 31, verses 1 to 13. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and the archers overtook him. He was badly wounded by them. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it, so Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his household died together. When all the Israelites in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled. And the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Beit Shan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched out, took the bodies of Saul and his sons, and brought them to Jabesh. Then they burned the bodies there. They took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days.